Welcome to another episode of Purchase to Profits. I'm Seth Ferguson. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss our daily interviews with successful real estate investors. Our guest today has been investing in real estate for over 13 years and has a portfolio of more than 1,350 units. His main focus is acquiring and repositioning multifamily communities. Matt Picheny is managing partner at MJP Property Group. Matt, welcome to Purchase to Profits. It's great to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me here. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. So to kick things off, do you want to tell us about your real estate goals right now?
Oh, sure. Well, I think my main goal right now for 2019 is to acquire 300 new units that I would be co-sponsoring in any particular market. I'm also looking to invest in about 4 to 5 other deals as a passive investor. You know, Seth, that's kind of the way that I work. I do some active investing as a co-sponsor leading deals, but 75% of my portfolio is things that I'm a passive investor in.
Yeah, and I'm always curious, like you mentioned you want to acquire 300 units. Where did you get that number from? Or was it just an arbitrary number because 300 sounds good?
Well, I think 300 sounds good. You know, I wanted to do something that would be a little bit of a stretch, but not too lofty. I think in today's environment, we see, you know, really compressed cap rates, and sellers are looking for really big numbers to sell their property. So I wanted it to be something that was achievable. I figured around 2 deals, somewhere between 100 to 200 units per deal. So 300 seems like a good number.
Oh, I definitely agree. And this is interesting because on this show, we have lots of operators on, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you because you had mentioned that a lot of your investments are on the passive side. So what led you to get involved on the passive side of real estate? Like, did you talk to somebody and they approached you with the deal? Like, how did you get started?
That's a good question. I got started as a passive investor because I wanted to be a sponsor and a lead investor. And I thought that the best way to do that would be to actually learn from people who know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, you know, I joined one of these groups, one of these mentor groups, which has been fantastic for me. And so inside of that, besides having a mentor and coaching, there's an entire ecosystem that I'm part of, and there's other people doing deals. So that's how I started. I started passively investing, and then I started getting more and more involved. I started becoming a key principal in deals, and now I'm at a point where I'm also sponsoring some deals as well.
Yeah, that's a good spot to be in. And maybe if somebody's watching and they don't understand what a sponsor is, do you want to explain that for us?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So in a syndication, as a passive investor, you would invest in a deal, but not necessarily really have control over it. You're not necessarily the person who's going out and finding the deal, acquiring the deal, and operating the deal. As a key principal, what you would be doing is you would actually be signing your name on the loan, like on a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loan. So you have some responsibility, even though those are generally non-recourse loans. There is a bad boy carve out if there's some fraud or something of that nature, and you would be held personally responsible. But as a key principal, you're lending some of your net worth and your liquidity and your resume to help that syndication, that group of people, take down the deal. And as a sponsor, you are usually the person who's going out, acquiring the property, getting it into contract, managing the entire process of getting all the different investors together. There's a lot of different things involved, and then on a day-to-day basis, or through the entire life cycle of the deal, you're the person managing that. I mean, a lot of times you'll have a property management team. I mean, all the things that I do, 132 units was a deal that I just did last year. We have full-time staff working on that, but I'm managing their activities and overseeing that almost on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, that's a really good answer, and that made it very clear for everybody. So thanks for doing that. Sure. So as a passive investor, how do you decide which operators you would like to work with? Like, do you have any criteria that you look for?
Yeah, and you know what, Seth, I love the fact that you said, what do you look for in operators? Because that's the first thing that I look at. I One of the things that I love to do, and we may be able to get into it a little bit later, is help other people who are looking to generate passive income. And so a lot of times people will come to me with deals and ask my advice on it. And my first question always is, how do you know the person? Right? Who is the person that you're investing in? Why are you investing with them? What do you know about them? What is their track record? What's your relationship? If it's someone that you just met on Facebook last week, maybe not the best person to be investing with. And I mean, maybe it would be, but I tend to not do that. I look for people that I know, that I like, and that I trust. I don't have any particular time limit, but I want to have known the person, met with them face to face a few times, get to know who they are, what they're about, see other deals they've done, talk with other people who've invested in their deals. And once it's someone that I feel good and I feel comfortable with, well, then I dig into the deeper details, because, I've invested in the past with somebody that I really know and I really like, and the deal didn't turn out so great. And, sometimes that happens. So looking at the fundamentals of the deal is obviously extremely important as well.
Yeah. So, and I think lots of people, when they're starting to look at syndication from a passive investor side, they just think that, oh, well, this person will tell me the deal and I can just give my money over. But I like how you mentioned that you actually have to know the underwriting of the deal. You want to look at the details and know exactly what you're getting into.
Yeah. As a sponsor of my own deals, I think maybe look at this with a little bit of a different eye. There's a few things that some syndicators are doing, especially now in this market, to make deals work, that I just find that underwriting to be a bit aggressive. It doesn't mean it won't do well. It may hit those marks or may exceed those marks. But I also feel that if there is a turn in the economy, maybe it's not going to hit those marks. So, certain things that I might look at are the reversion cap rate at the end, what they think the cap rate is going to be at the sale, or the rent growth, right? We've seen in a lot of markets tremendous rent growth, but, employers aren't increasing salaries at that rate. So at a certain point, I think we're going to sort of hit kind of a ceiling, or at least a softening. You're not going to see, 5-6% rent growth. Can't just go on forever and ever and ever if employers aren't, raising people's salaries by that amount. So those are some of the things that I look at in a deal.
Yeah. And do you have any maybe routines, daily, weekly, monthly, that you follow that helps keep you focused on your acquisitions and all that stuff?
I don't know if I have any particular routines. I one of the things is I like to respond to emails within 24 hours of receiving them. I generally try to do that sooner. That sometimes can be a daunting task, but that's one of the things that I think is super important. And then, it's interesting. The work that I do sort of varies on a daily basis, depending on sort of what's going on, because I wear a few different hats. I don't have a big staff and team of people to do everything, which is one of the things I like about my work, is that it's varied. And so, beyond that's probably the biggest routine that I would say that I have in my life.
Yeah. And do you make it a point of approaching other operators and building relationships to kind of build that deal funnel? Like, is that a focus for you right now?
So building my network is super important. That's a big focus of mine. In terms of getting deals that way, that hasn't happened for me, at least not yet. The way that I'm getting my deal flow is by meeting with brokers and property managers in the different markets that I'm looking at and developing those relationships. And I can't say that I necessarily do that with any sort of regularity. I mean, it is somewhat regular, but it's not like every Wednesday I make calls or something like that. But reaching out and speaking with passive investors is a great way to learn about different markets and look at what other people are doing and other sponsors. And so that's one of the things that I'm very very much interested in, getting onto podcasts like this one. People reach out to me all the time, which is fantastic. So I have wonderful conversations with people. I run a meetup group here in Boston where I live. And so we do that every month. We usually have about 40 to 50 people at each one of those events. So that's great. I would say about 50% of the people who come every time are regulars who come very often, but the other 50% are new, which is fantastic. So I get to meet new people, hear what they're doing, see what they're doing. I moved to Boston about 1.5 years ago, and it was a great way for me to learn about the market, the local market here, which I don't think is great for large scale syndications, but to really learn the entire market and the different ins and outs for it. It was great to do that. And I love doing that and talking with people.
Yeah, for sure. And before we get into a Keystone deal, you had mentioned that there was a situation where the deal didn't go so well when you knew the person. Do you mind if we talk about that a little bit for some lessons learned?
Yeah, we could definitely talk about that. So that was a deal that actually we just sold it last week.
That's probably a good feeling if you're selling that. Yeah.
Yeah, we invested in that property just about 2 years ago. Luckily, somehow we managed to sell the property, and we're going to look at it should be somewhere between a 6 to 8% return on investment. So annualized, we're looking at like 3 or 4%. So maybe just treading water when you take into account inflation. So I don't know how that happened. I mean, I do know how it happened, but I'm very surprised. The person who purchased the property was in a 1031 exchange. And interestingly, I just closed on a 1031 exchange recently and a couple of weeks ago, and I actually paid more in that 1031 for the property that I was acquiring than I would have regularly. And the reason why is it didn't meet my regular criteria for an investment. However, taking into account the tax benefits of doing that, it made it a phenomenal phenomenal deal. So I think that the person who was purchasing our property that we disposed of last week, was probably in the same situation. He knew the market, and there were some mistakes that were made when we acquired the property. As a passive investor, I was investing with two sponsors that I knew and that I liked. One had a little more of a track record than the other. And I think there were just some miscalculations going into it. It was actually the first deal that I've ever passively invested in. So, sometimes you make mistakes on your first deal. We're going to get into it in the next segment, but you're going to talk. I know you're going to ask me about the Keystone deal, which you mentioned, and that's going to be the first deal that I ever did on my own, because I think you learn a lot from those first few deals that you do. So I think there were some miscalculations in terms of where that neighborhood was, that they felt that it was on the path of progress, and maybe it is, but maybe that progress is going to take another 15 to 20 years. I think the rehabs were too aggressive in terms of the amount of money spent. It was presented as a C-class property in an A-class neighborhood. They were trying to, reposition this to like a B+. They were putting in granite countertops and things that I think were a little over the top. They ended up doing some additional renovations as time went on and spent like a quarter of the amount of money on those interior renovations and got the same rent bumps when they spent 4 times as much money. So I think there was a miscalculation on the neighborhood and what was happening. And our vacancy rate we had a really hard time stabilizing the property. We would keep leasing it out, but we kept having people leave. And it was kind of a revolving door. And, those things happen at times. The thing I can say is the sponsorship group was great about communicating with us. I think there's nothing worse than having a sinking ship and you can't find the captain.
Yeah.
Our co-sponsor, the co-sponsorship group that did this, was great about talking with us, letting us know proactively what they were doing, not really like sugarcoating it, like, hey, here, we're having these problems, here are the issues or the challenges that we have, here's what we're doing to combat it. And I'll tell you, they threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at this property. It didn't work, but not for lack of effort or lack of trying.
Yeah. And you know what, like based on those miscalculations that you mentioned, you guys actually got out of it pretty good by just treading water.
Oh,
like it could have been a lot worse. Yeah.
I was thrilled. If you would have valued it just based off of NOI and our purchase cap rate, we would have lost money. I cannot believe that the person bought it at the cap rate that they bought it, but they knew the area, had other assets in the area, wanted this particular asset, felt that they knew how to operate it well. And it was a 1031. So, we were happy to just walk away.
Well, so for lessons learned, as a passive investor, would you actually drive the neighborhood next time to become familiar with it, to maybe find out what's going on?
Sure, that's one option. Sometimes it's difficult. I live, like I said, in Boston, and there's not a neighborhood around here for me to drive. I don't own anything in the state of Massachusetts. The only thing I own in the Northeast is a duplex that I own because I used to live in New York City and we had purchased the property at that time. It's not a great place to invest. So this particular property was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So, I guess one needs to figure out, okay, how much money am I putting into this deal? And is it really worth it for me to go there? There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a question of time and money, right? Do you have the time, and do you want to spend the airfare and the hotels and everything to go drive that property, or do you feel comfortable enough about the deal without doing that?
Yeah.
And there's been deals where I haven't felt comfortable, and I have gone. Obviously, if I'm sponsoring a deal, I'm seeing the property before I even bid on it. But as a passive investor, I don't know that that's necessary. But there are many things that I think I would have, hindsight, looking at it now, that I would have looked into the underwriting, seen what it is, and maybe had more questions. And so one of the things that maybe I could have done to be more proactive, not proactive, but it just another way I could have approached it was if I had somebody that I knew, that I trusted, that I could have brought the deal to, who maybe invested in some deals, and get their take on the underwriting. I didn't do that because the person that I would have gone to was the co-sponsor of the deal. So I felt very good about it.
Yeah. And you know what, like sometimes it's just the luck of the draw too, right? Like you can't, if you've got a lot of things on the go, you can't focus 100% of your energy and efforts on one deal if you have, 5 or 6 on the go, right?
I agree 100%. Yeah. And that's my biggest challenge, I think, on a day-to-day basis. I get a lot of deal flow coming in from brokers, and it's really trying to figure out, okay, which ones make sense, which ones don't. Because sometimes on a first pass, it doesn't make sense, but if you dig deeper, you can find, there are ways that it would make sense, or vice versa. And just trying to juggle all those things can be a difficult task, like right now, right? Because this is the time of year where there's so many deals. I mean, towards the end of the year, it gets really slow and you have plenty of time. But right now, my inbox is getting flooded on a daily basis.
Yeah. And so after that, that escape from that one deal, let's talk about a good one, your first deal. So your Keystone deal.
Yeah. The first real estate investment deal that I did, which was not a primary residence, because I had invested in the past in a primary residence, not sort of like a house hacking that you would see on Bigger Pockets, just a single family. Or at the time I lived in New York, so it would be usually a co-op. And those did well, but my first investment property was a piece of property, and it was just raw land that I bought up in Connecticut in a really nice affluent community, lakeside community. And after a number of years, I decided to chop down the trees that were there and build a house, not by myself, obviously, but I designed a property. I designed the house actually, and worked with my builder, and then we got an architect to review and stamp it, and we built the house. And it was a phenomenal learning experience for me, sort of soup to nuts, because at the beginning, coming up with the drawings and the plans, that was quite a a learning experience. And then actually I would go up there just about every other week and watch the progress of the house and see how it was being built. And I learned a ton from that experience. And then once the house was actually completed, well, the thing that blew my mind the most of it all was having to pick all the stuff for the house, like the faucets, you know, like you want 4-inch or 8-inch spread. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. There were so many different things to choose that like I have an appreciation for now, but unless you've built a house or like completely gut rehab, like down to the studs, there's decisions that you just kind of take for granted. I had purchased other homes before, but never gotten into that level of detail. So that was interesting. And then after I bought the property, you know, my plan always was, hey, this could be like a vacation home, but I'm going to, you know, rent it out. I thought I would rent it out a little bit during the summer and it would be a vacation home for me. And what I found out that first year was there was such a demand for the rental that I was like, you know what? This is a rental house. This is not like a second home for me that I rent out sometimes. This is like a rental home that like sometimes if it's not rented, I'll go up and hang out for the weekend. And you know, there's what I failed to realize was that there was a ski mountain right next door, which brought this entire winter season of renters. I thought it would just be for the summer because that's when I wanted it with the lake and everything. And I learned so much from that experience. Renting, dealing with renters. I mean, I don't think I would ever do it again in terms of having a vacation rental home, because having to deal with renters on a monthly or sometimes on a weekly basis was the biggest pain in the butt that you could ever imagine. I didn't have like a third-party property manager. I mean, one of my big takeaways was like, I will always have a third-party property manager, like always. And so that was a big takeaway, and also learning just about taxes, you know, about depreciation. And I found out about depreciation, and then that you had to recapture it at sale. And then I was like, well, I don't want to take the depreciation. My accountant's like, well, you have to. And so, you know, it was quite a phenomenal learning experience. Not the greatest investment. When I look at it now, I would never do that deal, not in a million years. But again, that deal, I walked out unscathed. You know, I kind of, like on that deal I'm talking about in New Mexico, I kind of just like barely made a tiny little bit of profit, but you know, I also had losses throughout the time because it was a passive investment and I wasn't a full-time real estate investor. So I have these passive losses that were accumulating over time. So it ends up kind of being a wash. I had a great house. I learned a lot. So, you know, I have those memories of being able to go up there once in a while. So overall, it was a win in my book.
Yeah, I think this is the first time we've had somebody build a house and then turn it into a rental. That's great.
Yes.
But so do you want to talk about maybe the process of, did you finance the construction, or did you just pay cash? Like, do you want to talk about maybe the construction loan?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was a learning experience as well, because I had never done that before. Yeah, so I had actually, as you remember, purchased the property itself, the raw land, a few years prior. And I did finance that with a local bank. It was just a conventional loan. It was a relatively small, you know, very small loan amount. So to actually do the purchase of the property, I paid the balance on that loan. So what I brought to the table was the land and the plans, and went to a local bank, and they gave me a construction loan. And so the way that works is, you know, they set a particular interest rate, and during the life of the loan, you take certain draws. So, you know, I had to have enough money for them to start the foundation. And then once the foundation was complete, then we go to the bank and we say, hey, the foundation is complete. They send an inspector. There's these lien waivers that are signed by the subcontractors to say, yeah, we're not going to put a lien, we were paid. And then the bank gives you a check for that money. And you kind of just go along that way until the entire thing is done. And the way that this particular loan was set up, it would then convert to a full year, 30-year amortizing mortgage when the construction was complete.
Yeah.
It's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, I know some people get into some deep water when their costs far exceed what the draw is. Did you have any issues with that as you were going through the project?
Luckily, I didn't. I sometimes my eyes were bigger than my stomach, I guess, when it came to like picking the finishes for certain things. So, but I knew my budget and that I had to stay within it. I learned early on through my own properties that I had owned, and also I mentioned that those were in co-ops. I had been a member of co-op boards and actually was the president. Sometimes I was on a design committee one time. I learned that you need to have contingencies for all these types of things. So I had a 10% contingency budget. And luckily, we hit that. We didn't go over. So I knew where my stop was, and I had a little bit that nobody knew about except for me for those contingencies as they came up. You obviously don't want your builder to know that you have that 10% contingency because they'll spend it. But that was important to have.
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting deal. I'm glad you chose that one because we haven't had one like that yet.
Yeah, it's funny because I focus all my time now on multifamily and syndications, but when you say the keystone deal, like the one deal where I learned the most, I mean, that was really the one that started this whole journey for me.
Yeah. And now you've been at it for over 13 years. So like, do you want to, maybe somebody's watching and they're like you, they're about to do their first deal. How has real estate changed your life so far?
Yeah. So 13 years, I'm counting that first property, the one in Connecticut, right? Because it was an investment property. But for 10 of those 13 years, it was a side job, side gig for me. I lived, I lived and worked in New York City, and I worked in the advertising field and had a very, very busy and demanding job where I worked long hours. And this was like a hobby of mine. About 3.5 years ago at this point, my wife and I moved down to Miami, Florida, because she got a job opportunity. And that was the time where I decided to go and start doing real estate full time, which is when I started getting involved in the syndications. At that point, I had built up some real estate assets that were able to give me passive income. And also my wife's profession, she's in the theater on the management side. And both her and I had raised money and invested money in some Broadway shows that were also, cool. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. They're very risky, but we actually did extremely well with one in particular that allowed me to get close to replacing my income that I was making previously between all of the different investments. And at this point now, this year, I'll have exceeded what I was making in my regular salary. So I'm, I guess financially free, but, it takes time, right? I don't, Rome wasn't built in a day or, any of these other cliches you can say, but I think, you start with one and you start to build upon that. You start to learn from it. I learned for 10 years before I started really going full time, in this field. Yeah.
And what was the feeling when you made the decision to get into real estate full time? Were you nervous?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was nervous. Like I said, I had passive income coming in, but I mean, it wasn't like that much. And, my wife had a job, but it was, we had one child. We had a child who, she was about little less than a year and a half old when we moved to Miami. We wanted to have another one. Not that I'm a chauvinist and think that the man has to do everything, but I guess between me and my wife, we had to provide, and I just wanted to be able to provide for my family. That was important. That was really important to me. And so, yeah, I mean, it was scary. Like, am I going to be able to do this? And, luckily I have a wonderful, awesome wife who was very encouraging and very supportive of me doing it. And I guess I kind of just like jumped out of the airplane, which I would never do. I'm not big on parachutes or anything, but that's what I did. I mean, I just jumped out of the airplane and was like, all right, how do I make this work? And it was hard work.
Yeah. Good for you though. So many people think about making that jump and they never do it. So it's always great to have, this is why I enjoy this show, because, I'm able to speak with people who have done it, and you're able to set an example for those who are maybe just on that cusp and just thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, I would say go for it. I mean, you want to make sure that what you're doing is measured. I mean, I guess if you go back to that analogy of jumping out of an airplane, like, you want to make sure you have like your regular parachute and a backup parachute. And a lot of times, people, when they jump out of an airplane for the first time, they're doing it in a tandem jump. And I think that's kind of important. I haven't done anything in the multifamily, like all on my own. Like still, I mean, my last deal that I did, I had a partner, Justin Martinez. We took down 132 units, but Justin's been doing this longer than me, has more experience than me, and is an awesome partner. And so I was happy to do that. I'm in this big mentorship group, so I have a mentor that I can look to, and I have other resources that I can go to. And I think multifamily is really a team sport. So, I mean, that's the great thing. If you want to do multifamily and you want to do syndication, you don't have to go at it alone. You can have other people there with you. You can be part of a team. And I think that helps remove some of the risk that you might have.
No, that's great. Well, Matt, if somebody's looking for some more information on what you're doing or, MJP, where can they find you?
Yeah, so my website is mjppg.com. You can email me at matt@mjppg.com. So matt@mjppg.com. I love talking with people, if they're brand new and they've never done this before, or they're a very experienced investor. I mean, I love talking with people of sort of all levels. So happy to chat.
That's great. Matt, just want to say thanks so much for taking the time today. This was really great.
Oh, well, Seth, thanks for having me on this. I love this podcast. I think you're doing a great job with it, and I look forward to seeing many more episodes in the future.
Oh, no, it was my pleasure. And to you, our viewers, I wish you well on your journey from purchase to profits. See you next time.